Derin, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Ken, thanks for having me, man. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we've obviously never talked before, but your background is super intriguing. So I'm excited that you accepted our invite to be on the show. I would love to hear more about your background. I know you've got a sports background, but where did everything start for you?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, I can tell you, and super grateful for it though. I played professional baseball for a while. Got drafted in 2001 by the San Francisco Giants. Had five surgeries throughout my professional career, and so 2008 was forced to retire. At that point, they asked me to coach, to be a professional baseball coach within their organization. Honestly, I wasn't ready to do that. I thought it was a terrible idea. I was just frustrated because I couldn't play professional baseball, right? The dream that I had since I was five and I'd been chasing for 23 years at that point, realized was probably not going to materialize as a everyday Major League Baseball player, how I'd wanted to. And so the Giants were extended me some grace and said, oh, we'll give you 3 days. We'll give you 3 days to decide if you want to coach or not. And so I said, all right. And I was upset, went home, told my wife we had an 8-month-old at the time. And she said, well, if you don't coach, what job are you going to get? Because we need health insurance. We have a baby, right? And
Sure.
so, thank God for a great spouse to remind you, the important
Right.
things in life. And I thought, yeah, you're right. I guess I don't have anything else lined up. I guess I'll go back and coach and try it out. So I went back the next day. I didn't wait too long. Went back the next day and said, hey, you know what? Let's do it. And so ended up coaching and managing in the minor leagues for 5 years with the Giants organization. It was during that time, Ken, I can tell you, when I really locked in on the value of like mindset, right? I
Mm.
knew it as a player, but I always viewed sports psychology or performance psychologists, whatever. I viewed them as like those are people that help broken people, right? So I
Hmm.
stayed away from them like the plague. And really, I really could have used some help, especially after the last surgery, but I stayed away from them. And when I got into being an everyday coach on the field, I realized like, man, mindset is the separator. It truly is. Like everybody at this level at professional baseball is physically talented. Everybody gives a certain amount of effort that takes to be successful, but it's how you show up in the moments that matter most that really, separate individuals. And so I just really went back to school and was like, how can I be a better coach and learn more about sport and performance psychology and how to bring that to the field. I never thought about it from a proactive standpoint. And then it was when I went back to school, I went, holy cow, man, I can do this thing from a proactive approach. It's not for broken people. I mean, you don't have to be sick to get better, right? It's one of
Sure.
these things that we can just be intentional about how we cultivate our mindset going forward. And so that was at the end of 2012. I got my degree, and then I've been doing mental performance coaching since 2012. Built out the San Francisco Giants, their first mental performance program, went to the University of Notre Dame, built one out there, which was a lot of fun to work with those coaches there. And then, went back into Major League Baseball to work with the Seattle Mariners. And now I'm consulting with the Arizona Diamondbacks, here in my home state of Arizona. And also, though, I've moved into the corporate space. And so I have a full-time role at a cybersecurity company called ReliaQuest, which, we have 6 operating centers in 4 different countries. And so now moving mental performance coaching within the corporate space as well. So that's been my journey in a nutshell, man. But that's how I got here.
And I know you're in Arizona now. Did you grow up there, or like a lot of baseball players, did you catch spring training fever and just stay there? Like, how'd you end
Yeah.
up there?
Yeah, I grew up in Arkansas, actually. So
Okay.
grew up in Arkansas, north central Arkansas, specifically in a little town called Mountain Home, Arkansas. And but yeah, drafted by the Giants. And so, as you know, their spring training is in Scottsdale, Arizona. And it was one of those things where my wife and I looked at it and we go, it's one less move we have to make every year if we just make our home in Arizona. And so, even with that, I tell people in my career in professional baseball, my wife and I, we've been married now 22 years, but during those first like 11 years of marriage, we moved 54 times, right? And we're
Wow.
still married, which is a testament to her, I can tell you.
54?
Yeah,
Oh
ridiculous.
my God.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
That's
So,
insane.
yeah, I mean, they're apartments, right? So it's like
Yeah.
we have blow up furniture. If it didn't fit in our truck, we either sold it at a garage sale, Craigslist, or threw it away, right? Goodwill or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, that was it. It was crazy times.
How did you convert from, I mean, first of all, within coaching, so it's like, one day Darren's a player, the next day, not because you wanted to, they invite you to be a coach. And I'm assuming it's not mindset. I'm assuming at that point it's whatever, pitching, batting, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then how does that I mean, as you're learning stuff, how do you parlay what you've learned in, and how do you bring it to the organization? How do you sell the organization on, I'm ready to help you now in this way?
And that's a great question. And I was I was unbelievably unprepared to coach, right? I think the and I say this all the time, but I think in the United States it's getting better, but in the United States it's kind of like the prerequisites to be a coach are, did you play and do I know you?
Mm-hmm.
If you can like check those two boxes, it's like,
Right.
hey, go coach, which
Right.
is insane to me, right? Especially because I know I've experienced it where I was so unprepared. And I was really fortunate in that I had two extremely humble, gracious, great teacher mentors with the Giants organization, and Tom Trebelhorn, who at the time had spent over 40 years in professional baseball, Joey Amalfitano, at that time had spent over 50 years in professional baseball. And I just clung to them, man. I clung to them. And I can tell you, it took me probably a good 2 years where I felt confident and comfortable in a way where I could articulate things that I'd learned along the way, and also meet guys where they're at, right? Because
Right.
everybody's experience is different. Just because I did it that way doesn't mean this is the way to do it. And so I had to get out of that space. And so, yeah, I was an infield coach and a hitting coach, and it was just a lot of learning, great mentors, asked a lot of questions, stay curious. I'm still a curious person. And that was ultimately how I was able, I think, to have some impact on the guys. Obviously, I think like all of us, we always know we could do a little better. But that was how I learned. But I can tell you, I was extremely not ready my first year, and I didn't feel confident as a coach until probably 2 years in.
But they must, I'm sure, even though it is a little bit about who you know and all of that, and that you knew the game, they also, I'm sure, saw something in you that you didn't yet see in yourself. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I mean, definitely. Because now that I've been in professional baseball for 24 years, you can see things in people, and that's what I would say. It's like curiosity, that growth mindset, hunger to learn, have a spirit of humility, putting the organization first, having the courage to have tough conversations, obviously understanding the game, evolving with the game. I mean, the game has completely changed from when I started playing in 2001 to where it's at in 2024. So, the adaptability of that. So you start to see that in players as they come through, and you go, man, that when that
Yeah.
person's done, they're going to make a great coach. Like they
Right.
don't know it now, but we're going to target them to make, and help them coach.
Right. I usually, in situations like that, whether it be sports or business, even, it's almost like the guys that become the natural leaders from, people that other players might turn to, or on a sales team, the one they're going to for advice, even though they're
Yeah.
not in a particular role, right? And they usually gravitate. So you and your wife met really early in your baseball career, it sounds like, right? I mean, had you just
Yeah.
gone pro, or were you guys already
Yeah.
dating when you went pro?
Yeah, we were dating when I went pro. So she was a college athlete as well. We met in college, and
Okay.
so when I got drafted, they shipped me out to Salem, Oregon, and yeah, in one season I was like, man, I'm just gonna marry her. This is crazy. So that first off season went back, and we got married.
What was it like? Not trying to stir up the bad old memories, but I mean, I got to think, like, you're on, like you said, since 5 years old, this has been your dream. And one day someone says, it's not happening anymore.
Yeah,
Which led you to go like, what do you mean, coach? I mean, in your mind, you're probably like, I'm not here to coach. I'm here to play. Right.
yeah.
Tell me about that. I mean, like, what was your mindset like then? And how difficult was that to deal with? And I'm guessing that might have contributed to what you're saying was a little bit of a slow start to coaching, might have been letting go of
Yeah.
playing. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I can tell you, Ken, I think one thing that I don't know if I was fortunate or not. I don't know how to label it. I'm not even going to label it really, but I was never released, right? So I didn't have a coach, or the organization didn't come in and say, you can no longer play, which happens to a lot of guys. I made the choice. And because I made the choice, sometimes there is regret, right? Sometimes you look
Right.
back and go, man, what would it have been like if I would have stuck it out just a little longer, right?
Right.
But so it was definitely a self-awareness, look in the mirror type thing. And when I got to a place where, when I set out to become a Major League Baseball player, that was the goal. The goal wasn't to kick it around in the minor leagues and hang on and just do this for as long as I can, right? And
Right.
so when I realized I got to a place where I'm like, my shoulder's not going to hold up, my wrist is not going to hold up. I hurt every day. It's not even really that fun anymore, right? And I had like all those honest conversations with myself. Then I made the decision to go, you know what? this isn't going to work. And it was extremely challenging. I can tell you I was bitter. And I think that, and as you mentioned, that's why I got such a slow start into coaching, because I was bitter. I didn't think it was fair. You asked the questions, why did I get hurt? I thought I was doing all the right things, and now looking back, it was, my default is always work harder, right? If it's not working out, just let me work harder, and then
Right.
looking backwards, like when you're going through a rehab process, working harder is not the answer sometimes, right? It's like a
Right.
lot of times it's listen to your body, step back, get support, versus like I'm going to outwork the thing. And so, I think I perpetuated some of my future injuries because my default was always more, and so, but with that being said, yeah, it was definitely challenging to let it go, right? And so that's why it did take me a couple years to really lean in to go, hey, you know what? That part of my life is over. And that's okay. It was a great run, great journey. Like, are there small regrets? Sure, that's life, right? But do I have any big regrets? No, because I did it the best way I knew how. I built a lot of great relationships, had a blast doing it, and now it's time to pour into others and help them accomplish their dreams, and went all in on that, and I've been doing that ever since.
So as you started bringing out or developing these programs for, it started with the Giants, moved on to the Mariners. Very, very interesting too, because I grew up. I think I was telling you I lived in Phoenix for a long time
Yeah.
myself, but I was actually born in NorCal, and then when I was 4 years old, we moved to Seattle, and I was up there when the Mariners expanded. So
Oh
Seattle's
wow.
still my team in the American League, but the Giants are my team in the National League. You've worked for both of them or with
Yeah.
both of them. Um, Talk to me about that then. So how do you go from being kind of the player coach, a skills coach essentially,
Yeah.
to then a mindset coach, and then how and with the Giants, it's probably you've got credibility, people, you're
Yeah.
networked. How are you able to transition that over, to the Mariners, and then over to a completely different set of people over at Notre Dame? How did those things play out?
Yeah. Well, I was extremely fortunate to be in player development, doing mental performance coaching when the Giants won those three world championships in 5 years, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
2010, 2012, 2014. And I can confidently say I learned far more than I contributed, right? It's like we had great players, great leaders, Hall of Fame coaches, shoot, a few Hall of Fame players, So uh, being a part of that environment where you got to see what world championship behaviors look like, what world championship systems look like, learned a ton. And so, kind of going back to, I played in the Giants organization, I coached in the Giants organization. So early on, I was in that whole process. I was also fortunate enough to have the credibility with guys like Buster Posey or Brandon
Mm-hmm.
Crawford or Brandon Bell, Madison Bumgarner, like those guys that came through the organization. So when I transitioned into mental performance coaching, it was more natural because I'd coached those guys in the minor leagues as
Right.
a skills coach, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh, DMAC, you're doing this now. It's like, yeah, So it was a little simpler transition for me. And then, as you know, it helps have success, right? So when I went to Notre Dame, it helped that we had a lot of success with the Giants, right? Like if I
Sure.
had come from, you know, nothing against the Cincinnati Reds, I don't know why I'm picking on the Reds, but if I had come
No.
from the Reds, it might not have carried the same weight at the time, right?
Right.
Because of just the recent success that the Giants had had. And so, in my experience at Notre Dame, I was working most closely with the 26 head coaches across every team, right? So there's 26 different teams there. And my role there was really to help them just better understand what is mental performance coaching? Like, how do you build out a mental performance program within your team? Uh, because if you think about Notre Dame, it's largely, a destination school, legacy coaches there, you work a long time. And so you have, generally speaking, more experienced coaches that mental performance coaching was new to them. Right. And so it was like, some resisted, some were curious. And so it was like helping them understand what it is and what it isn't. Right. And then when I went back into working with the Seattle Mariners, obviously anytime you work at a place like Notre Dame, that carries with it a lot of a weight as well, right? And so again, learned far more than I contributed there around some of the great coaches and programs that they had built. And so, each one kind of built upon, the other, and have really taken each experience as similar as they all are, they have unique differences, but kind of it has shaped the framework for which I coach specific athletes. It's shaped the framework for how I coach coaches and stuff like that, just based on my experiences, and then took that to the Mariners and then obviously to the Diamondbacks now.
And I heard you on another podcast talking about the heart of performance. And what do you
Yeah.
feel that is? What is that to you?
Yeah. Heart of performance for me, everything you do flows from your heart, right? And so what does that really mean? And so I'll just walk it back this way, Ken, kind of how let me deconstruct this idea, right? Of like, why did I do this thing? Why did I act in this way? Or why did I perform or behave in this certain way? And so you take that one step back and I go, well, you did that because you felt like it, right? It's our emotions that influence our actions. And so the next question is like, well, why was I feeling that way? Why was I having why was I experiencing those emotions? And I can say, well, because you were thinking something, right? It's our thoughts that determine our emotions, and our emotions influence our actions. Well, the next question is, why was I thinking that thing? Like, why was I having those specific thoughts, and why was I holding on to them? Well, I can tell you that our thoughts are a product of our perspective, right? So our perspective, it's our perspective that determines our thoughts. Thoughts determine emotions. Emotions influence actions. Well, the last question is, well, why the heck do I see the world that way? Why do I see the situation that way? Why do I see this game this way? Well, our perspective is determined by our identity, right? So how I see myself truly goes back to that. How I see myself determines how I see the world, and how I see the world determines how I think about it. How I think about it determines how I feel, and how I feel influences what I ultimately do. And so when you think about the heart of performance, like when I work with athletes and coaches, we truly get to that identity conversation, right? And what's in identity? It's beliefs. It's those hard rooted, those deep seated things that research tells us we get roughly before we're 8 years old, right? Those deep rooted, deep seated beliefs. That's part of our identity. Another part of our identity is our core values. These are these things that we choose either consciously or subconsciously. Generally around high school, college time, we start to choose specific behaviors and things, values that are going to drive our behaviors going forward. And then the last piece is a self-image. And self-image, this is why mindset gets kind of tricky, but it's more context specific, right? So an example would be, Ken, I can tell you, I don't see myself as someone that can fix anything around the house. I don't see myself as a
Right.
repairman at all, you know? And so if something goes wrong, right, if I get a leak in my sink, I freak out. You know, I'm
Right.
like, is this, black mold, load bearing wall? Like, who do I call? Like, I start sweating. But I can tell you, if I was called in today to go speak with the Major League Baseball team and stand in front of 26 of the best baseball players on the planet and give a talk around teamwork and collaboration or whatever it might be, I'd say, let's go, right? I have a ton of confidence to do that. That has nothing to do with beliefs or core values. It has everything to do with how I see myself in those
Hmm.
particular contexts, right?
Hmm.
And so that's why mindset gets a little tricky. But if I see myself as someone that can do the thing, then guess what? My perspective is different, which impacts my thoughts, emotions, and ultimate actions, right? And so for me, the heart of performance is identity and how you see yourself. And I just had this conversation with some leaders literally an hour before you and I started talking. But I get nervous when people go into self-discovery mode versus self-creation mode, right? Because a lot of people go, well, who am I? Why did I do those things? And they really focus on the past, which it's not a bad thing, right? It's like we're going to get clues about our future based on some of our past behaviors. So those are important things to think about. But I'm more concerned with like, who do you want to become? Like,
Right.
who do you want to be? And what are those behaviors? Like, don't let past mistakes and past behaviors define you going forward. Let's decide who you want to be. And then what behaviors do we need to create or what habits do we need to create going forward? And so our identity for me is like, yeah, it's largely based on who we were, but the power of the mind is, man, we can create whoever we need to become going forward if we understand what's at the heart of performance, and that is how we see ourselves, which is our identity.
Yeah, I love the way you brought that together because we talk a lot about identity on here, and I think that you know I try to tell people our brains are not really wired for success. Our brains are wired to be correct
It's
to
good.
what our identity is,
Yeah.
and so if my identity is that I'm overweight and always will be, then no diet in the world will solve that because my brain will keep looking for evidence of why I'm fat and sloppy or
Yeah.
whatever, or what I eat too much, and it'll just keep reinforcing itself. But it's interesting because in sports, you do have those guys that are, maybe like a Steph Curry or something, where it's like, give me the ball, right? Like it's a close game, give me the ball, and of course you go, well, yeah, he's good. He's the best player on the team, or, arguably. But some of those guys, like their shooting percentages, actually, as good as they are, actually goes up in clutch time, right? Michael
Yeah.
Jordan, people like that. And it has everything to do with, no, I'm the guy. Like and that they're the guy. Everybody
Yeah.
knows they're the guy because they believe it so much that, and they've backed it up and they've reinforced it and they've reinforced it and time again. So when you're going through this with baseball players that are struggling, let's talk about, you were a hitting coach, somebody's in a slump, maybe they saw themselves as a pretty good hitter and now they're, batting sub 200 for the last 10 games.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you do with them to, obviously there's mechanical things, right? But
Yeah.
but so much of it is around mindset. Like if they had it once, like how do they get it back?
Yeah. Great question. And I do think that's one advantage that I've had as a mental performance coach, because sometimes I can see like, no, this is a mechanical thing. It's not a mindset thing,
Right.
like, um, I was speaking with someone the other day and we were talking about kind of the same thing around, well, what if a pitcher can't throw strikes? How do you help them get the confidence to throw strikes again? My first thing is like, well, I just want to check out the mechanics, because maybe their mechanics are so jacked up they don't have a chance to throw strikes, right? It's like,
Sure.
like no amount of confidence for me, Ken, right now will put me on a black diamond on a snow mount, like on
Sure.
a slope. Nothing, right? I need to spend time on the bunny hill, right? There is no
Right.
self talk that's going to allow me to get down the black diamond. And so, anyway, I say all that in that when a guy's struggling, right? It's like, first, it's like, we need small wins, man. Like we need
Yeah.
small wins, because I do believe uh, progress is one of the greatest motivators. And so if we can start focusing on some little areas where it's like they're getting small wins, it's like, okay, hey, I can see that I can start moving towards this, right? Second thing that I'll often challenge people on is like, do you need confidence to be successful? And while it's nice and increases the likelihood of that you will, you don't need confidence to be successful, right? It's like, and so I'll just walk guys through this exercise and I'll ask them, say, hey, have you ever had bad batting practice before the game and a bad game? And they'll go, oh, yeah. And I say, okay, have you ever had bad batting practice before the game and a good game? And they're like, oh, well, yeah. And I say, okay, you ever had a good batting practice before the game and a good game? They're like, yes. And I go, you ever had a good batting practice before the game and a bad game? Well, yeah. And I said, then does batting practice matter? Well, no. Okay. Practice matters, but it doesn't matter so much that you carry it with you, right? And so I think
Right.
a lot of times I want to detach the thought away from like, you have to be confident to perform, because if you think you have to be confident to perform, then you're focused on how you feel versus on what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so by trying to detach, like, hey, I would love it. Look, I would love it if we all were confident, but it's going to come and go based on a lot of different things, because our minds are powerful. But what I do know, if we can get focused on the smallest thing, which might be for a hitter, it's like, hey, let's just get your front foot down, or hey, let's just focus on driving the ball to right field, or hey, let's pick the simplest thing that you can control, and let's just focus on that. Don't focus on if you're confident you can do it. Don't focus on what other people think. Let's just pick the smallest, simplest thing. Let's start there, have a little success there, and then start building from that.
It is so interesting. It's probably what you realized in your journey, but the psychology in sports and the how well it translates to business. Because as you're telling that story, I'm kind of in my head, I'm thinking about, well, that's no different than like a sales rep that all of a sudden
Yeah,
can't sell. Like
exactly.
what happened? They made President's Club last year, and now they're throwing up a bunch of donut holes on the board. But because they're blanking, they actually get worse at the fundamentals,
Yep.
because in their mind it's like, well, why bother, right? Like, and so we literally have had the same conversations. It's like, well, we know over time in sales, for example, if you make enough phone calls and set enough appointments and talk to enough people and do proper follow-up, you don't really need to be that skilled to at least have some level of success, right? Like you're going to
Right.
get it just through the work and doing the basics. When did, as you were doing this, and you're working with, I mean, literally that 2012 to 2015 Giants team is one of the best in the history of baseball, and you got to be a part of that, which is awesome. And did you know then that you were going to sort of parlay this knowledge into business, or when did that happen? When did you make that transition or start going towards that transition?
Yeah, I had no plans of that.
Yeah.
I had zero plans of that. And one, because I didn't think the skills transferred was the biggest thing. I thought, played baseball my whole life. I'm a baseball player. I'm a baseball coach. Go back to identity, right? I'm a baseball guy. I
Right.
just saw myself as a baseball guy. And so in the fall of 2018, though, when I was with the Seattle Mariners, a friend of mine was working with ReliaQuest, this global cybersecurity company, and they were doing a leadership conference down in Scottsdale, which is where we lived at the time. And he couldn't make it. He was working more closely with an NFL player, and so he said, "Hey, can you go down and cover for me?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, but what am I going to talk about?" And he was like, "Man, talk about leadership, teamwork, growth mindset, right? Letting your commitments guide your behaviors, not your emotions. Like, talk about all the things you talk about with players." I'm like, "Yeah, but this is like cybersecurity." He's like, "Dude, it's the same thing. Performance is performance. It's the same thing. Go for it." And so I was nervous. I was scared. I thought this is going to fall flat. Like I thought it
Sure.
had no transfer whatsoever. Went in there, did the best I could, and walked away from that. And everyone was really grateful. And then from that, the founder and CEO of ReliaQuest, Brian Murphy, was like, "Hey, we'd like for you to work more closely with us going forward, if you could, and start to coach him." And I thought, like, I honestly thought I kind of tricked him. I thought, like, well, I mean, I'm glad you like the talk, but I still
Yeah.
don't know how I can help you. You're an entrepreneur. You're a founder. Like, you've bootstrapped this company for 9 years, and excuse me, or for 7 years, and now it's worth $1 billion, whatever it is. It's like I don't think I can add value, right? And so again, and that kind of goes back to the harder performance where it was an identity thing, and it was a conversation I was having with myself, and I didn't see how it transferred over. And then from time and the grace of him and him helping me realize, like, no, the skills you're teaching athletes, the mental skills you're teaching coaches, any leader in any environment can leverage those and help make themselves better, and then ultimately make their team better. And then it's you just learning the language from it. So it was somebody else again seeing it in me. It wasn't me seeing it in myself. And then, like, stepping out of my comfort zone, asking questions that were seemingly silly when I mean, are silly, right? I mean, I can tell you one time they were looking for a CMO. Again, I'm like, well, I don't even know what a CMO is. Like, what are we talking about right now?
Sure.
And,
Sure.
and they're like, is this guy serious? It's like chief marketing officer, right? So,
Right.
but anyway, so I mean, these are the type of questions I was asking. And so, yeah, so in all that, I say that, and that, um, it was never the plan to do corporate, right?
Right.
But I love helping people. I love coaching people. I love seeing driven people that get to a space where they're like pushing the boundary of what's next, right? How can I get to that next level? And what I've found is next level tends to be whether it's mentoring or bringing others along or being more present with your family, right? I've even seen that where it's like high performers are like, look, I got all this stuff from a professional standpoint, but like, how can I be a great performer with my family and in my community? And so it's like helping build guardrails and helping them build systems and structures in place where they can do that over there. So that's what I've really enjoyed doing. Again, still working sports, but learning along the way, working in business.
Well, and going back to that balance, that podcast I heard you on, you were talking about like a work-life balance myth. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so it's when I say this, a lot of people kind of balk at first because I say, look, focusing on work-life balance does not lead to your best life.
Right.
It just doesn't. Like striving for balance between two separate things does not lead to your best life. Look, I want people to feel balance, but I think for me, balance is my mind and my body are in the same place. I'm standing on stable ground, right? And so everyone wants to experience balance, but trying to keep these two things in equal balance is not the way to do it, right? So that's why I talk about work-life presence, right? Be present. And I learned this in sport, and I didn't know I learned it in sport until I stepped out of it. But it's like the beauty of professional sports is, man, when you get in the clubhouse and you're prepping for a game and then you step out into the dugout and there's 40,000 people, like your phone is nowhere to be found. You're not thinking about emails. I love my family, but I'm not thinking about my family right now. We're trying to, how do we win this ball game? Right. We are completely present and we're trying to do whatever we can to win. Right. And they go by like that,
Mm,
because you're so engaged. You're like, man, this is amazing. Like you're trying to win and play and compete. And then the game's over, and guess what? You recap, you debrief, you spend 15, 20 minutes. How can we do it better tomorrow and all that kind of stuff? And then after that, you pick up your phone and then you call home. Hey, how's it going? And then you go home and you leave the game at the field, and then you're fully present with your family. And so that was how professional sports was for me.
right.
When I got to business, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm giving a presentation. And while this person's listening to me, they're also sending an email and trying to respond to teams. And they check their phone to send a message like, make sure you pick up the kids' lunch. And I'm watching all this and I'm like, oh my gosh, like how do these people function? Right. And it blew me away. And so it hit me like, you know what? They're just trying to balance everything. Like, hey, I'm going
Right.
to leave early. And then they take the business call on the phone while they're driving their kid to their sports practice. And then the kid's upset because the parent's not present. And then the people in the meeting are upset because they know they're not totally present in the meeting, but they think they're doing their best job. And then they walk away and they're like, I'm so burned out. I need more work life balance. I'm like, no, you need more presence.
Right.
You need more presence. Like, be present in the meeting and do a great job. And then when you're there, go to your kids' practice and be present at your kids' practice and watch them and cheer for them, right? Just be present wherever you go. And so that's been, I've really been like honing in on that idea, because in our desire to balance everything equally, it just
Yeah.
stretches us way too thin, versus just be present where you're at, and it'll be amazing how much better you are when you're there and how much more balance you actually will feel just by focusing on being present.
I agree. It's funny, like 3 hours ago, I just did a training session with my team. And, I started with a story from when I was early in my career. And like a lot of us going into new things, trying new things, we get overwhelmed sometimes, right? And I don't like
Yeah.
that word anymore, but it's, whoa, be careful what you ask for, because now you're going to get it, right? You've got all this extra work to do. And maybe the last job you had before you got promoted, you had that one on autopilot. You could do it very easily. And now you're in a different pool. And, what I started realizing was there's not a massive separation in IQ points normally between like mid-level management, senior level management, and entry level management. There is a big difference in the skill set that's needed to be productive and, you know, take on additional capacity, right?
Yeah.
And I had a boss that helped teach me that lesson kind of early in my career. And so to me, that feeling of being overwhelmed is an opportunity to actually look and go, okay, something in the way that I'm doing things is not clicking, right? I'm not being efficient or whatever. And I think, so 20 years now that I've been on this very intentional way of like scheduling, right? And this is what I was running my team through earlier today was break everything down to 1 hour or less chunks. A lot of people have heard of like the Pomodoro method. It's very similar to that, but break it down and be specific with what you're trying to accomplish during that time frame and stay on it and use airplane mode on your phone and don't be returning anything and just be there. And I think what's really funny is when people look at my calendar, if I screen share it, they'll go, oh my God, that looks like Tetris because it's all like color coded and
Sure.
specific. And they'll go, don't you ever just want to be in the moment? And I said, this is how you are
Mm,
able to be in the moment, right? Because I've done what you're talking about, Derin, where I'm trying to do everything and I can't. And so I'm sitting in the
yeah.
meeting and I want to listen to the speaker, but I've also got 3 emails that from clients that have to be returned and I didn't delegate it to someone, and my wife's car broke down and whatever else is going on with the day. And it's like the only way you can be present is to actually schedule yourself, in my mind, in a
Yeah.
way to be present. And that involves lots of things, that we could dive into on another call, but like delegating appropriately,
Yeah.
determining what your priorities are. And to me, this all has to be done in advance because again, our brains will go to the easiest thing available at the time, right? So if I'm
Yeah.
not, or it'll put out fires, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
response, what is it? Not fight or flight, but sort of
Yeah.
like stimulus and response, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a terrible way to lead as well. So no, I love what you're saying there. When you started working with them, tell me about that. Coming on board, did you go full time right away? Were you consulting with them? Like, what did that look like initially?
Yeah. So I consulted with well, specifically with founder and CEO. We're still, founder led. And so did that for about 2 years before I joined full time. And then it was after the 2020 Major League Baseball season where we all have horror stories from COVID, right? And so it was, one of those seasons where I started to look and go, you know what? Like my son's getting a little older, my daughter's getting a little older. Professional sports requires a ton of time and a lot of travel. And I thought, how can I be home more? Like, how can I be
Right.
more present? Is ultimately the question I was asking myself. And I realized I'd done enough in the game where I could still work in professional sports and just consult, right? But then I wanted this new challenge of like, what does it look like in the corporate space? Like how come all the jobs in performance psychology are only in military and professional sporting environments or collegiate, right? It's like, how come? Like, why is it not in the business space yet? And Brian Murphy and I, again, Brian's the founder and CEO of ReliQuest. We both aligned on like there's an advantage to be gained here by
Right.
training our mindset. And the advantage is not as much productivity as it is just more engagement from people that are living more holistic lives, people that are more engaged in their communities, more engaged at home, and which ultimately leads to more engagement at work, right? And so, but we don't spend the time teaching these mental skills to people in the corporate environment. HR exists, but it's generally a more reactive position, like, oh, come talk to us when things are bad. But mental performance is like, let's be proactive in this. Like, what are some ways that we can stay fully connected to who we are, what's most important, build some strategies like you've already built in your workflow, right? It's like, how can you schedule a way that's going to help you be more present, right? And those
Right.
types of things. And so when he was talking about like this is his vision for it, I thought like, man, that's a great challenge. I have no idea how this is going to work, but I'm for it. Let's go figure it out. So that was 2021. That was the beginning of 2021 that just went for it and have been learning and trying to build stuff and connect with people along the way. And it just started as me. And now we have another full-time mental performance coach. She's in her name's Dr. Nicole Detling. We were able to get her from the United States Winter Olympic team. She's been doing it a long time. We got a couple mental performance consultants. One is currently an active member in the United States Navy, and another one is overseas, a former a retired British military officer who's in our London office. So we've grown it from, I say we've increased our team by 400%.
Yeah.
It's easy to do when there's one of you. But yeah, there's four of us now, and it's a great group, and I love the fact that we get to challenge people on how they're thinking, how they see themselves, what's a better way to reframe this situation, just so they can, again, like I said, it's not so much about productivity as more as it is about engagement and how you can, be great at work, leave it at work, be great at home, leave it at home, be great in the community, leave it, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's how we've been running at it.
I love that. And yeah, maybe it's only increased to four people, but first of all, that's four more than most companies have in this
Sure.
space, right? And those
Yeah.
are no slouches, right? I mean, those are some big heavy hitters in there. You talked about four components of every coaching session. Can you tell me what those are for you?
Yeah. So for me, there's an accountability piece, right? And so the accountability of coaching is, when I think about it, it's you're going to be sitting with an individual leader or someone on your team that you get to serve and lead. And the first piece is always around like, how are you doing? How have things been going? Did you do what you said you were going to do
Yeah.
ultimately, right? Like super simple. But the framework I'm going to share with you, I think is always helpful for coaches, because I think if you have a framework for anything, it just helps you be just more intentional in what you're trying to accomplish, right? So there's the accountability piece that it always starts with. How have things been going? How'd you do? Right. Then the second piece is, for me, helpful. Like, how can you be helpful in that? Ask questions, right? We're not in the point where we're telling them what to do, right? That the best coaches ask the best questions, right? So helpful is like, oh, well, why do you think you were successful? Or what led to you not getting that? Or what would you do differently if you could do that again? So you start asking these helpful questions that helps the person that you get to coach internalize, yeah, what did happen? Maybe they haven't thought about it. Maybe they haven't reflected on the experience much. And so you're guiding them through these questions. And the reason why that's so important is because self-discovery is one of the greatest things that an individual can make that leads to changed behavior, right? You telling me, Ken, you're like, hey, Derin, go eat walnuts. I'm like, I don't like walnuts, Ken. But if all of a sudden you ask me enough questions that I realize walnuts were good for me, I'm probably going to go eat some walnuts, right? It's like super
Right.
simple. But so there's the accountable piece, there's the helpful piece, and then there's the adaptable piece, right? Like, hey, let's be adaptable together. So what are some new things going for based on what we've learned from these questions? What behaviors do we need to change? Do we need to change anything? And this is the whole keep, start, stop, conversation, what
Yeah.
we need to keep doing, what we need to start doing, stop doing. But that's the adaptable piece. And then the last piece that I share with everybody is the focus, right? We got to focus people walking out of there, because you just covered a lot in that 20 to 50-minute coaching conversation, whatever it was. Focus. And the best way to drive focused is, what did you hear that we talked about? Ask them the question. And then what are you going to do in the next week or 2 weeks until we ever meet again? Like, have them verbalize it to you. That
Right.
drives focus. The cool thing about that is getting clarity of focus walking out of a meeting is, guess what your next coaching conversation starts with? accountability again. Hey, did
Sure.
you do the thing you were focused on? Right. And then you go to the helpful, and then you go to the adaptable, and then you go to the focus. And it's kind of those four things that, again, there's an art to it in the middle of it. But I think that framework, at least for me, has been most helpful in helping drive behavior change and helping individuals improve performance.
Very cool. And I wanted to ask you before we wrap up, where did you get, obviously you went to college and being in Major League Baseball was a huge education in and of itself, but what influencers, thought leaders, coaching programs, like whatever, like what have you picked up along the way? Do you got any favorites?
Oh man, I have so many mentors that they don't even know they're my mentors, right? You
Sure.
know what I mean? Like whether they're podcasts or books, I love like Andy Stanley is he's a pastor of a North Point Community Church in Atlanta. Great thought leader around leadership. You think about all the people in the Atlanta area, all the major corporations. He has the opportunity to lead a bunch of them. So I love his thought leadership around that. So read a ton of his stuff. Like Ryan Holiday is
Mhm.
a guy who writes around stoicism. Like I love a lot of his work. So like the obstacle is the way. Um, I think like one of the books that I think is really probably the groundbreaker for all other books is Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. And it's all around growth mindset, right? And because that's the foundational thing that it all starts with, on growth versus fixed mindset. So that to me was like foundational. But where I'm at now, Ken, it's like I'm into biographies. I'm into learning how others have applied a lot of the basic performance psychology principles that we all know about, right?
Yeah.
Because there's emotion attached to storytelling. And so I think when you can wrap performance psychology principles in effective storytelling that grabs people emotionally, then it becomes more memorable. And when it's more memorable, people are more likely to do it and figure out a way for it to work, in their life. So, I've just been on really the last few years trying to read, about successful people, what they've done. There's a great podcast, I think it's called Founders, right? I can't remember the fellow's name right now that's doing it, but he ultimately takes a biography and boils it all down in about an hour and a half, which I'm like, hey, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now, yeah, more just learning stories that encompass a lot of the basic, simple, hard to execute, but simple success strategies that people have implemented over the years.
Yeah, because when you talk earlier about like identity and about the reason why people do stuff and don't do stuff, um, when I'm talking to people, it's like some people get things academically, and then some people like get it hardwired. And I could tell it was hardwired for you. It's like, no, this happens, and this creates this, creates this, creates this, and I'm like, wow, like, yeah. I mean, it's obvious that you spent a lot of time on it. Yeah, so I was just curious, but um, tell us. We'll put in our show notes ways that people can, reach out to you and follow
Sure.
you as well. Anything else for our audience before we get going?
Yeah, I think what's always helpful is for us all to be reminded we can act different than how we feel.
Yeah.
I think that's probably like one of the most helpful things I can share with people is like we are not our emotions, right? And we can act different than how we feel. And I would also add to that, we are not our performance, right? We're far more valuable than our performance will ever be, right? We're not defined by what we do. We're more defined by who we are. And so I think it's just important. I think if we can keep those two things in proper perspective, it allows us to be more intentional and act in a way that I know we all want to act, right? It's just like emotions, great informants, terrible dictators, right? And
Right.
so it's just one of those things like you can act different than how you feel. So, yeah. And the last thing I would say is if you're trying to do something really cool, it's supposed to be hard,
Right.
and that's okay because you can do hard things. I think sometimes people get hung up on, oh, it's too hard. It's like, no, you can do hard things. Or they're like, I wish it was easier. Stop wishing it was easy and just accept that it's hard and go
Yeah.
for it. So yeah, that's what I would leave the listeners with today.
Well, so good to talk with you. Great to connect with you. Thanks for everything that you're doing in the leadership space. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, shoot, man. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate you.
You got it. Take care.